It was supposed to be the perfect day, a dream come true for Emma and Jake. They had spent months meticulously planning every detail of their wedding, from the delicate lace on Emma's dress to the carefully selected music for the reception. They had envisioned this day for years, a celebration of their love that would forever be remembered by family and friends. Everything seemed to align perfectly for this special moment in their lives. Emma was a vibrant young woman with an infectious laugh and a passion for photography. She had always loved capturing the beauty of life, from the smallest details to the most profound moments. Jake, on the other hand, was a successful lawyer with a reputation for being level-headed, compassionate, and dependable. They complemented each other perfectly, their personalities blending into a relationship that everyone admired. It was no surprise that their friends and family had eagerly awaited their wedding day, knowing it would be nothing short of magical. Story. Venue was a picturesque vineyard tucked away in the rolling hills of the countryside. The rows of grapevines seemed to stretch forever, bathed in the warm glow of the early morning sun. It was the perfect backdrop for their ceremony. The guests arrived early, many of them traveling from different parts of the country to witness the union of these two beloved individuals. The air was filled with excitement as Emma's bridal party gathered in the bridal suite, laughing and chatting as they helped her get ready. They all knew how much this day meant to Emma, and they wanted everything to go smoothly. Meanwhile, Jake was preparing with his groomsmen in a nearby cabin. His friends teased him about the usual pre-wedding jitters, but Jake appeared calm, confident, even. He had always been the one to remain grounded in situations of stress, and today was no different. He had everything under control. He was ready for this new chapter in his life. As the morning wore on, the atmosphere remained light and joyful. The scent of freshly cut flowers filled the air, and soft classical music played in the background. Emma's heart raced with excitement as she was helped into her wedding dress. The gown was everything she had dreamed of, elegant, timeless, and beautiful. She looked in the mirror and could hardly recognize herself. Overwhelmed by the surreal reality of it all, she was about to marry the man of her dreams. The bridal party offered words of encouragement, wiping away tears of happiness as they admired Emma's radiant smile. Her mother, who had been by her side throughout the entire planning process, gave her a tight hug, assuring her that everything would be perfect. Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation as she prepared to walk down the aisle. She thought about the vows they would exchange, the life they would build together, and the future that awaited them. Jake, on the other hand, was already standing in the ceremony space, waiting for his bride. He smiled to himself as he adjusted his tie, imagining how breathtaking Emma would look when she walked toward him. He had never been so sure of anything in his life. Today would mark the beginning of their forever. Nothing could ruin this moment. But beneath the surface of the perfect day, something was stirring, a feeling that something wasn't quite right. Neither Emma nor Jake could have known that this picture-perfect morning would soon turn into something they could never have anticipated. As the clock ticked closer to the ceremony, a sense of unease began to creep into the air. What started as a light flutter of nervous energy soon transformed into a growing tension. It wasn't immediately clear what was causing the shift, but something felt off. Emma sat in the bridal suite, her heart racing with excitement, but also a strange undercurrent of anxiety she couldn't quite shake. She kept looking at her phone, hoping to hear from Jake, but there was nothing. No text, no call. The minutes ticked by, and still, no sign of him. At first she told herself it was nothing to worry about. Jake was probably just finishing up with his groomsmen, getting ready for the big moment. Maybe he was out getting some fresh air before the ceremony, as so many grooms do. But as time passed and there was still no word, that comforting thought began to fade. She stood up and paced the room, glancing at the clock, then back at her phone. She tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. The sound of Emma's voice on the other end of the line echoed back to her, sending a jolt of fear through her. It wasn't like Jake to be unreachable. He was always punctual, reliable, always where he said he would be. Where could he be? Was he stuck in traffic? Had something happened on his way to the ceremony? She called again. Voicemail. Another call. And again, no answer. Her mind began to race as she thought of all the possible reasons why he might not be there. But none of them made sense. They had planned this day together for months. Every detail organized down to the last minute. She had already imagined him standing at the altar, waiting for her, smiling that reassuring smile. But now, that vision seemed increasingly distant. Emma stood at the window, trying to calm herself. The vineyard was beautiful, bathed in sunlight, and the guests were gathering outside, excited for the event to begin. She could hear laughter and music drifting in from the reception area. The world outside seemed blissfully unaware of the storm brewing inside her. Her bridesmaids noticed her anxiety and approached, asking if everything was okay. She forced a smile, assuring them that Jake was just probably running a little late. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. The minutes passed slowly. Every time Emma looked at the clock, it seemed like the hands moved just a little bit slower. One of the wedding planners came in to check on her. Emma asked if they had heard anything about Jake, but the answer was always the same. We haven't been able to reach him, but everything will be fine. But Emma's instincts were telling her otherwise. A half hour before the ceremony, she was finally told they were beginning a search. Jake was nowhere to be found. The guests were growing restless, and the staff was now scrambling to make sense of his disappearance. The planner made several more calls, but each attempt was met with silence. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, her breath quickening as a sense of panic set in. The day she had dreamed about for so long was beginning to unravel. What had happened? Where was Jake? At this point, she had no choice but to trust the people around her, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something horrible had already happened. She had to focus. There were still so many people waiting, and she had to stay calm. But as the search continued, and the minutes turned into an hour, the reality of the situation began to hit her. It was no longer just about the wedding. Something far more serious had taken place, and Emma had no idea just how far this day would go to unravel the life she thought she knew. As the minutes stretched into an hour, the panic began to mount. Emma sat in the bridal suite, feeling increasingly numb, her hands shaking as she clutched her phone. There were no updates, no new calls or messages. The staff continued to search the venue grounds, speaking in hushed tones as they scoured every corner of the property. Emma's world was slowly collapsing around her, the wedding of her dreams turning into a nightmare. The uncertainty was unbearable. Where was Jake? She could hear the sound of people moving outside, calling Jake's name, the whispers growing more frantic as the search intensified. Guests began to murmur among themselves, their excitement turning into confusion and then worry. What started as the joyous hum of a celebration quickly morphed into a subdued, anxious atmosphere. Emma's bridesmaids tried to comfort her, but their words barely registered. Nothing felt real anymore. She was trapped in an unbearable limbo, where nothing made sense. After what seemed like an eternity, Emma was told that the police had been called. It felt surreal. This was a wedding, a day of happiness, not a scene from a crime thriller. But as the hours continued to slip away without any word from Jake, reality began to settle in. Something was wrong. Emma's mind raced with possibilities. Had he been involved in an accident? Had something gone terribly wrong on the way to the ceremony? The longer he remained missing, the more unsettling the possibilities became. The police arrived quickly, asking the staff for any details about Jake's whereabouts. They questioned the wedding planners, his groomsmen, anyone who had seen him last. It was clear that they were taking the situation seriously, but Emma couldn't shake the growing feeling that they were slowly uncovering something far darker than any of them could have anticipated. As the day wore on, and still no one had heard from Jake, the search moved beyond the venue. Officers combed the nearby woods and the roads surrounding the vineyard. Emma couldn't bring herself to join them. She couldn't look for him, not like this. It was as if the world had tilted off its axis, and everything she had planned for the day, for their future, was slipping through her fingers. Then, hours later, the worst news came. A call from the police informed Emma that a body had been found in the woods just beyond the vineyard. Emma's stomach twisted. The world around her seemed to crumble as she heard the words. Jake's body had been discovered, his life taken, in a brutal manner. The details were sparse at first, but one thing was clear. This was no accident. He had been murdered. The shock hit Emma like a physical blow. She couldn't breathe. The man she had been about to marry, the love of her life, was gone. How could this be happening? Who could have done this? The joy that had filled the morning now seemed like a distant memory. The scene at the vineyard, once filled with laughter and excitement, had turned into a dark and surreal nightmare. Emma felt as if the ground had been pulled out from under her. She was no longer a bride. She was a widow, a woman whose life had been shattered in a matter of hours. The police now turned their attention to the details of Jake's death. They began to piece together the timeline, investigating everyone who had been close to him. As they worked, Emma was left in a haze, unable to fully process what had just happened. All she could do was wait. Wait for answers. Wait for some sort of clarity. But nothing would ever make sense again. The day that was meant to mark the beginning of her life with Jake was now the tragic end of it, and Emma was left with more questions than she could bear to ask. As the days passed, the investigation into Jake's murder intensified, but with each revelation, the truth became more unsettling. Emma, though grief-stricken, found herself thrust into the center of a whirlwind of police interviews and unanswered questions. The idea that Jake's death had been a random act of violence seemed impossible. There was something deeper at play, something that none of them could have foreseen. The detectives began by examining Jake's recent activities, speaking to friends, colleagues, and anyone who had been close to him in the weeks leading up to the wedding. The more they uncovered, the more the image of Jake began to crack. Beneath the surface of the successful lawyer, the charming man Emma had fallen in love with, there were troubling secrets, secrets that no one had known about, not even Emma. They found evidence of substantial financial strain. Jake had been involved in several risky business ventures, some of which had turned sour in recent months. Hidden debts and unpaid loans began to surface, along with a trail of shady transactions. The police also uncovered connections to people who weren't just investors, but individuals with criminal ties. It seemed that Jake had been in deeper than anyone had realized. The portrait of the man Emma had thought she knew was now stained with shades of greed, secrecy, and desperation. At first, Emma couldn't reconcile this new information with the man she had loved. How could she have been so blind? She had never. questioned Jake about his work or his finances, trusting him implicitly. But now it seemed that everything, every conversation, every moment of their relationship was built on a foundation of lies. The investigation uncovered a name that sent chills down Emma's spine, a former business partner of Jake's, a man named Thomas Blackwell. The police quickly discovered that Blackwell had disappeared under mysterious circumstances a few years earlier, leaving behind a trail of suspicion. There were rumors that the two men had fallen out over a business deal gone wrong, but no one knew the full extent of their falling out. Emma's heart sank when she learned that Jake had been trying to sever ties with Blackwell. It was clear now that Jake had been trying to extricate himself from something dangerous, but at what cost? As the investigation continued, the police found evidence suggesting that Blackwell was not just a disgruntled partner, but possibly someone with far darker intentions. He had been seen in the area in the weeks leading up to Jake's wedding, raising suspicions that he had been tracking Jake's movements, possibly planning something all along. Emma was forced to confront the possibility that Jake's murder was not just a random act of violence, but a calculated hit, one that had been set in motion long before the wedding day. Yet, as shocking as these discoveries were, they were only the beginning. As detectives dug deeper into Jake's past, they uncovered a web of deceit and betrayal that seemed to stretch in all directions. It wasn't just Blackwell who had a motive, there were others too. People who stood to lose something significant if Jake had gone through with his plan to distance himself from the dangerous world he had become entangled in. With each new piece of evidence, the mystery deepened. But there was one thing that stood out above all else. Someone close to Jake had known too much. Emma felt a chill as she realized that she could no longer dismiss the thought that perhaps the person who had orchestrated Jake's murder was someone she had trusted completely. The shocking realization gnawed at her as the investigation continued. Was it possible that someone she knew, someone she loved, had been involved in this horrifying crime? Emma had once believed that her life with Jake would be full of happiness and love, but now, in the wake of his death, she was left grappling with the painful truth. The man she thought she knew was not the man she had married, and the people around her. They too might be hiding secrets that could shatter everything she thought she understood about her life. The walls that had once seemed so sturdy now felt fragile, and Emma was beginning to wonder if she had ever truly known anyone at all. As the investigation into Jake's murder continued to unravel, a chilling realization began to dawn on the authorities. The people closest to him might have known more than they had let on. Emma, already devastated by the loss of her fiancé, found herself at the center of a storm she could never have predicted. At first, it seemed inconceivable. How could she, the grieving fiancé, have anything to do with his death? But the more the police delved into the circumstances surrounding Jake's life and the days leading up to the wedding, the more questions arose. It was the financial records that first piqued the detectives' suspicions. Emma had access to many of Jake's personal affairs, and as the investigation dug into his hidden debts, it became clear that Jake had been under significant pressure. What the police discovered was staggering. Emma had been involved in some of these dealings. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a wife's support for her husband's troubled business ventures. But as the evidence mounted, it became clear that Emma had been more than just an innocent bystander. She had been aware of Jake's financial troubles and had even played a role in covering them up. What shocked the investigators most, however, was the discovery of Emma's connection to Jake's former business partner, Thomas Blackwell. While it was no secret that Jake had been trying to cut ties with Blackwell, what no one had known was that Emma and Blackwell had been in contact in the months leading up to the wedding. The police found text messages and emails between them, some of which indicated that Emma had been part of conversations about the future of Jake's business dealings, and perhaps, more disturbingly, about the best way to deal with Jake's reluctance to continue those dealings. The picture that emerged painted a troubling narrative. Emma had been deeply entwined in Jake's financial world, and with the wedding approaching, there were whispers that Jake had planned to sever ties with both Blackwell and the dangerous business ventures that had consumed him. This wasn't just about money, it was about power, control, and Emma's desire to maintain the life she'd grown accustomed to. She had been fearful of losing everything, and the possibility of Jake walking away from it all meant she could lose it too. The more the detectives pieced together, the more it became evident that Emma's involvement was far from innocent. She had not only known about Jake's troubled dealings, but she had also helped keep the dangerous situation under wraps. Emma's motives for the murder began to come into sharper focus. The wedding day, once symbolizing the start of a new life, was now understood as a carefully orchestrated opportunity. Jake's death wasn't just a crime of passion or a random act. It seemed to have been meticulously planned. Emma had used the chaos of the wedding day, the stress, the distractions, and the high emotions to orchestrate the perfect cover for her involvement in the crime. Then came the final, shocking twist that left everyone stunned. Emma had been the one to set it all in motion. She had been working with Blackwell. Together, they had plotted to eliminate Jake, knowing that his death would clear the path for them to take control of the businesses and the financial assets that Jake had been ready to abandon. The truth was heartbreaking. Emma, the woman who had seemed to be the perfect fiancée, had been living a double life. Behind her loving exterior, she had been driven by fear of losing everything she had built with Jake, and fear of the life she might face without him. Her love for him had been overshadowed by her desperation to hold on to the luxury, the status, and the future she had envisioned for herself. The wedding morning, that was supposed to mark the beginning of a beautiful life together, had instead turned into a day of tragedy. Emma was arrested, and the public's shock was palpable. How could someone so seemingly perfect, so in love, be capable of such a horrific act? The story of Emma and Jake became a cautionary tale, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that even the closest relationships might be hiding dark secrets. In the end, the wedding that was meant to symbolize the beginning of their life together became the tragic end of it all. The love Emma had once felt for Jake now seemed like an illusion, a carefully constructed facade designed to hide her true intentions. And as Emma stood in the courtroom, facing charges for her involvement in the murder, it became clear. The wedding that was meant to celebrate love had instead marked the beginning of her own downfall.